Good morning, students. Welcome once again. So, here we are again with your topic for today story writing. We'll try to do and understand story writing in a very simple manner. So, here we are first. As you are aware, story is a work of imagination, and story writing is an art where good imagination and creative ideas are used to capture the reader's interest. We have all discussed it in the previous video. Now, children, especially, are very fond of listening to stories. We all are fond of stories. We all like to watch stories via movies and all, and we most of the people like to read stories, and we only are interested in reading stories which have got some element of suspicion, some element of suspense, mystery involved in the story. Now, you must always remember while writing a good story what we should keep in mind. What are the essentials of a story writing? First is that the plot and the main theme of the story should be good and clear. The setting of the story should be clearly indicated and the characters should be described well. And then we may add interesting details to the plot with our imagination and make it enjoyable for the reader or listener. And a cloud of mystery or suspense in the story always helps in holding the reader's interest, and the expression of the writer should be good. Stories can be written with the help of given outlines, may be used on a moral or with the help of opening lines. Now let's see how we can develop stories and how we can what all we should keep in mind while writing a story. Now first, as I told you in the earlier video also, there are certain elements of a short story. So what are those elements? These are the elements into which on which a story is based, into what a story is woven. So what are the elements of a story? They are the characters. First are the characters, then is the plot, then is the setting, conflict and climax. First are the characters. So, what are the characters? Characters can be a protagonist or there can be antagonist, but it's not always that there can be these kinds of characters. It can be a story of two brothers. It can be a story of a brother and a sister. It can be a story about two neighbors. So it can be anything. It's not always that there is a protagonist or a hero and there is a villain or the antagonist. So it can be other characters also, but remember, you have to limit the characters. You don't have to add as many characters as possible. No, it has to have a set limit of characters. Then it has a plot is a series of events going in a proper moving in a proper sequence. Then it is the setting where, what is the place, which is the place where we are, where this all these events are happening. So which is the place, and time. So you must have always heard, you must have mostly heard the story begins with once upon a time or in the year this. So this is the time. There was a person who lived in a village. So we here the village is the location, and once upon a time or in the year or yesterday, a few days back. So this is how we can use time and location in a story. Then there is the conflict. Conflict is whatever the interesting part of the story is. So there is a plot, of course, but there is conflict also, in which the writer tries to hold the interest of the reader by putting that conflict, because we have to see the conflict, and then we get interested in knowing the consequences of that conflict and what happens in the end, and whatever happens brings on the climax of the story, the most interesting part of the story. If there is a conflict in the story, then it necessarily brings the climax, because we have to see the end of that conflict. We have to know the end of the conflict, what happens to that conflict. So that brings on the climax, and there can be ambiguity. The story can be, the ending of the story can be ambiguous. So what ambiguity is something what we are expecting, but that does not happen. The writer or the storyteller leaves it to the imagination of the reader or the listener, what should be the ending of the story, how should the story have ended. So that is the ambiguity, because the writer or the storyteller doesn't give us the clear idea in the ending. So he leaves it to the imagination of the listener or the reader. That is called ambiguity. We can think of two endings there. So this might have happened, or this could have also happened. So this is the ambiguity. Otherwise there is a clear cut ending of the story, when the story ends with a happy note, or sometimes with a sad note, but it can have ambiguity also. So how are these elements used? First are the characters. So, character can be person or an animal or a thing in a story on which the whole story is based. Or what all are these characters doing? What happens to them? So, it can be people, it can be animals, or it can be anything in the story. Next is the setting. Setting is the place and the time. The setting is the time and the place where the story occurs. So, for settings, we can take places like home, forest, village, city, anywhere. Okay, and for time, we can use words like in the year 2005, or we can talk about yesterday, or we can use words like during summer, during winter. So these are the times we can use in the setting. Now the plot, the main events, the series of events that make up a story. So you can see in the picture, there's a person walking, what happens next to him, and then it's like a timeline. First, this is the first sequence, then comes the second, then the third. So it should move about in a proper sequence. It should not go haywire. Like if we are talking about this, then we will go directly to this sequence. No, it should move in proper order till the ending, so that we know, we can imagine, or we can expect certain things ourselves. They should not go, or they should not go haywire. Like first we are talking about a man, then suddenly an animal appears, or we can talk about a person having lunch, then suddenly he's having dinner. So the plot should go in proper manner or proper sequence. That is called the plot of the story. Now next we can have conflict. So it, whatever the story is about, the characters and all, we can have conflict in the story. So it can be a between siblings, it can be between friends, there can be some problem in the story, it can be a fight, there can be some misunderstanding, or there can be some issues in the story which leads to the climax and then to the solution in the story. Then comes the climax. Climax is the most interesting part of the story. So climax is the term used to refer to the part of a story where the tension or the action reaches its highest part. Sometimes the climax is a crisis point in the plot. So how does it happen? First, the story moves about in such a way that this climax begins. So we are talking about the whole entire story, the entire plot of the story. First we are talking about the happy beginnings and all, we are talking about their general setting, what are those characters doing. Then suddenly in this plot of the story, or in such series of the events, there comes the point where we reach the climax of the story. So that is the beginning of the climax. Like you have heard the story of the monkey and the cap seller and the monkeys. So when that, I hope, I am sure most of you remember that story, when that cap seller falls asleep under that tree. So what happens? The monkeys come down. So that is the beginning of the climax there. And they take all his caps and wear them and climb upon the tree. So this is when the climax in that story begins. So we have the rising action. So what will happen next? So we get excited to know what will happen next. What will the cap seller do now? So when he opens his eyes, when he wakes up, what happens? He sees that all his caps are gone. So that means that story has reached the climax there. First is the beginning, when those monkeys take the caps, and then when they go up and the person and that cap seller wakes up and he sees, and there is a climax. So that is the rising action. Now he thinks about some ideas. He wants to think about some ideas by which he could get his caps back. So that is the rising action. Suddenly he hits upon some ideas. So that is when he gets those ideas how to bring back his caps. That is when the falling action begins. So he has got some idea. Now he will work on that idea. And last is the resolution. So when he throws those uh, things on them and the monkeys drop the caps, they emulate him, they imitate him, and then he reaches his solution. This is the last ending of the climax, when the solution is reached. Now see this story. Find the elements of the story given below. Now this is a very simple and short story. The fastest rider. Ali was the fastest bike rider in the town. No one could beat him in a race. He won every trophy. But one day, Ali was riding at the park. He was speeding on the trail and he put his head back to feel the wind on his face. Just then, his front tire hit a rock and his bike began to move unsteadily. He fell off his bike and landed on the sidewalk. His knees were scraped and his elbow was hurt. His friend helped him back on the bike and they rode slowly and safely out of the park. See, this is a very simple story here. Now we have to find the elements of the story, whether those elements, the plotting, the setting, the characters, or the climax, whether all these elements have been used in it. See this. All the words underlined, they tell us about the different elements of this story. First, which is the word that has been underlined? It is the Ali. So, what is it? It is the character. This is the character. So, one element is that. Now, at the park, this is the setting, location. Now, next is we have to find the plot. Plot, you can see, you can, for that you'll have to read the whole story. Ali was the first. This is the description of Ali first, characterization of Ali. Ali is the character and describing him is the characterization. No one could beat him in a race. He won every trophy. This all is the characterization. But one day Ali was riding at the park. So here, from here the sequence starts. He was riding at the park. Park is the location, but the sequence also starts what happens to him. So we have to go in a proper sequence. He was speeding on the trail and he put his head back to feel the wind on his face. But what happened? So all this is the plot or the setting moving in a proper series. So after some time we reach the climax. See, just then his front tire hit a rock. This is the beginning of the climax here. And his now we have to find the consequences of this beginning of climax. And his bike began to move unsteadily. And what are the consequences? This is the main rising action. What happened to him because of this climax? His knees were scraped and his elbow was hurt. So what happened? When did the help arrive? What is the following action? That his friends came and helped him. This is where the falling action has begun, and they wrote slowly, and they everything went off well. The climax is there, the consequences or the exciting part or the rising action, and when his friends come, this is the falling action, and last is the solution that they help him and they ride back. So these are some elements in a simple story like this. Now keep these in your mind when you write, when you begin to write a story. Keep these in mind. What the characters, what are you going to say in the story, how you are going to plan the story. So what tells us about this main plot of the story, main theme of the story, and where the location, why, if there is a conflict in the story, why does that conflict happen, and how does it start, and who all are affected by that conflict, and when, timing. So you have to keep all these things in mind, all these words, what, where, why, all these comprise of the elements of the story. So all these things, what, when, they all answer your elements of the story. And last, to remember how to write, how to go about your writing techniques. So points to be remembered: use proper punctuation. If you are writing a story, use proper punctuation and capitalization. It's only while you are writing, not when you are narrating a story. While you are writing, use right words. Like I told you in the earlier video, just remember the setting, imagine the setting, remember it, where you are, what your location is. So use the related vocabulary for that, and simple sentences, don't make it very complicated. Use very simple sentences which go well with the reader, which the reader can understand. And use an eye catching title, give a very eye catching and interesting or attractive title to the story. And last, use past tense. Mostly we see the stories are always written in past tense, something which has already happened, so we are relating that kind of story. So this was all in a story. Hope you have understood, and I am sure you'll become a good writer if you are interested in writing stories. So keeping all these things in mind, you can become a very good story writer and teller. But keep all these things in mind. Thank you, children. God bless you.